talk about 30 of my favorite books because it's my 30th birthday. They're just 30 of my favorites that I feel like represent a little bit of who I am. What better way to introduce myself to BookTube, help you all get to know me a little bit better, but also just share some books that I am absolutely and forever obsessed with. So let's get into it. All right, let's get to know me through 30 different books and see if we have anything in common. Starting with Truly Devious by Maureen Johnson. I actually have been listening to this entire series on audiobook, but I loved it so much that I needed to have it on my shelves. I don't know if anyone else does that. I don't really love owning multiple copies, but if I've got it on ebook and audiobook and I'm obsessed with it, like I want to be able to see it on my shelves, you know? Anyways, this was one of those books that I, like many of you, started getting back into reading in 2020 during the pandemic. That's when I started my book talk and my bookstagram. And I found this series. I don't know how, because I'm not usually into mysteries really, especially YA mysteries. Like I prefer there to be a little bit more darkness if I'm reading some mystery. And this series just kept me guessing. The main character, Stevie, is so freaking cool and like relatable and just like interesting, and the audiobooks are so well done. So I actually just recently picked up the newest one, but this series just really satisfies that curiosity inside of me. It keeps me guessing. It's one of those series that for once I can't predict the ending, and that is just what I love. That's kind of right there. Let's get a little sweet with it. In a New York Minute. This is by Kate Spencer. And one thing about me is I am going to eat up a rom-com. And I'm not just talking about books, I'm talking about movies, I'm talking about shows. Just give them all to me. I'll watch them all. I'll rewatch them all. I'm so in love with rom-coms. And I love reading romance, but sometimes it doesn't feel like a movie, if you know what I mean. This one in particular does. This has one of the best meet cutes. I'm not gonna tell you what it is because it is just so much fun. I was snickering as I was reading it out loud, and I just think it's fantastic. The meet cute was so much fun. The entire book was just a joy from start to finish. It was a quick read, but it's one of those ones that like, I just feel like this is what a romance novel should be, and I loved it. I also ended up reading it while I was on a trip in Joshua Tree. So carrying on my little tradition, I bought a Joshua Tree postcard, wrote about the trip to remind myself on the back, and I keep it inside. So that just makes it even more special. Moving on to an original, an OG Hannah before the days of BookTube, Book Talk, or Bookstagram. You knew it was gonna be here. The Hunger Games, Suzanne Collins. And you know what? This is one of the ones that like, yeah, the book's better, but like the adaptations are phenomenal. Like Jennifer Lawrence, fantastic. Side note, I am Team PETA, as I should be, as everyone should be. Is anyone actually Team Gail? I don't think so. This is just one of those core series for me that's solidified my love of reading. You know, there's that Shall Not Be Named series. There's this one. There's a couple others that maybe we'll get into, maybe we won't. But this series in particular, just, it sticks with you. The references are endless. You can reread it a billion times and it's still just as good. It always hits. And it's my OG reader days, so Hunger Games definitely had to make the list. Okay, moving on to some more spookiness. I am a person who definitely has to balance out my copious amounts of romance reading with thrillers. So I'll get a little bit too suffocated by too much sweetness back to back to back. So I just need a little murder. And enter Riley Sager. I actually had the pleasure of meeting him when he came to Arizona to the Poison Pen bookstore in Scottsdale, which is super cool, by the way. It's all mysteries and thrillers, just very spooky. Yes, I also did say he. Riley is a man, that's his pen name. All of his books I have read, except for the most recent that just came out about a month ago, because I'm saving it for the spooky TBR. And they're all just what I think a thriller should be. People might say, oh, it's not a 5-star, or maybe some of them you see coming a little bit, or, you know, it could be slightly predictable, or just really short, quick reads, but I think the thriller is thrilling. It's doing what it needs to do is the point. I have never once read one of his books and not needed to flip page after page to find out what happens, and they all hit. I love the paperbacks in these styles, specifically with the neon. They're my favorite. And I just think if you haven't read any Riley Sager and you are looking for especially like an introductory thriller, like you're new to thrillers, he is a great place to start. Absolutely fantastic. I can't get enough. I will read everything he's ever written, and he's also a Swiftie. In his second to most recent book, he even has a dedication that is a Taylor Swift lyric. So, a Baby Han original, aka one of the first books I ever remember reading, Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. This is just one of the prettiest copies I own. As you may know, I actually do collect them. I have a bunch back there. And I just think Anne is for all ages. If you're looking for a way to get started on reading classics specifically, Anne is a great place to start because it's written for kids. And yes, it's old at this point, but it's not hard to understand. And Anne is just one of the most wholesome characters of all time. As a kid, she really made me fall in love with words, the way that she doesn't just say like, oh, that's the lake over there. It's the lake of shining waters, you know? She's just very poetic and dramatic, and I love that about her. She made me want to read more. She made me want to have a better vocabulary, and she made me want to kind of like never give up, as cheesy as that sounds. I just think Anne's a really inspirational character. And also, her and Gilbert Blythe are the original enemies to lovers. I do not need to say more, and I will fight you on that till the day I die, but it's fantastic. It's also fantastic on audiobook, holds up, and it has so much heart. Also, I'm still pissed at Netflix for canceling Anne with an E because it was perfect. No notes. Moving on to some also elementary school hands, so we're growing up a little here. We've got the Inkheart series by Cornelia Funke. I honestly have not reread these as an adult. I just recently repurchased them through thrift books, but my thing about this series in particular and the Thief Lord, which she also wrote, we read them in my elementary school, and our teacher actually read them aloud during like reading hour. I don't know what they called it, but for me that was my beginning of I guess love of audiobooks. I didn't realize that's what it was at the time, but I love being read aloud to, and I also love reading aloud. Like, I liked being called on in class to read, the dork that I am, but this series in particular is just so great. One cruel night, Maggie's father reads aloud from Inkheart. An evil ruler named Capricorn escapes the boundaries of the book, landing in their living room. Suddenly, Maggie's in the middle of the kind of adventures she thought only took place in fairy tales. Somehow, she must master the magic that has conjured up this nightmare. Can she change the course of the story that has changed her life forever? Fantastic. So I'm really excited to revisit these as an adult, but I also just love having diversity of books to recommend, all ages, all genres, and I unfortunately don't have any of my childhood books that I grew up with. I moved several times, and I probably had to sell them at some point to make some money, and so I've found it really healing to go back and find either thrifted or like used books online of my old childhood favorites, so that I can reread them and just have them on my shelves, because like I said, they're part of who I am and who I became as a reader. All right, let's switch it up into getting into some more recent favorites so that we are not just only strolling down nostalgia avenue. We've got to have a variety here, like I said. One of my more favorite recent authors who I will read everything he has ever written, Stephen Rowley. So this book, The Guncle, we actually ended up reading for my book club, and he came to our book club meeting. So we were formerly called Brunch Babes Reads, and now we're called the Moody Readers Book Club. But anyways, this book, it looks like a cup of sunshine, a shot of espresso, as Andrew Garfield would say. But it is slightly deceiving, because yes, there is so much fun and so much heart to this book, but there is also some like gut-wrenching feels. Especially, I've heard, if you listen to the audiobook, which I want to, I'll get it from the library, so I don't have a bunch of copies of it, but Stephen narrates it himself, and I've heard from many of my book club members that they were weeping listening to it, especially in their cars. So this book in general, it's about the guncle, the gay uncle. He ends up caring for his niece and nephew, I believe, after, his niece Mazey and his nephew Grant, after tragedy strikes and they lose their mother. So it's his relationship with the children. Like I said, so much heart. There's a lot of humor to it. I love the setting. I love how Stephen's brain works and how he writes. It's just beautiful. And I feel like this was a really big moment for us as a book club, having just a really cool, successful author that we loved. And someday I'm gonna make it out to Palm Springs and I'm gonna meet him and his husband, who's also an author, because they are a power author couple, and I'm gonna get my book signed. On to another book club book. You can see I tabbed the shit out of this in a not aesthetic way, because I didn't know that was a thing at the time. This is actually a self-help book. I know, who is she? I'm primarily a fiction reader just because I read to escape. I feel like I already learned enough for the most part in my day-to-day, so I have to really seek out something specific that I want to learn. But this book in particular, Brag Better by Meredith Fineman, is a book that ever since we've read it years ago, I keep recommending it to people. I've actually bought a copy of this for several friends when they've told me like stories of their life where I'm like, you know what you need? You need this book. You need this book. I know, I'm very annoying. But the premise and idea behind this book is, especially for women, it can apply to anyone, but this is especially common with women. In the workplace, we just really struggle to communicate and evaluate our worth. So we might want and deserve that raise, but how do we communicate that? How do we ask for it? And so it's all about bragging better. So you need to learn how to brag about your achievements and say, oh, not only do I just want this raise, but I deserve this raise because last quarter our numbers were up by 5%. We brought on 3 new clients and also retained 95% of our old clients, which is much higher than the average retention rate. Something like that, you get the idea. But this just really gives you the tools and the inspiration to do that. Fresh by Margot Wood. This book right here is a bisexual dream, first of all. It is so cute. It is like illustrated within. There is little footnotes. It's super funny. It takes place in college. So our main character here, Elliot, she essentially decides that, you know, she is just going to give herself the best college experience that she possibly can in the form of finding as many lovers as she can. And there is a lot of hiccups along the way. And there is one pesky RA who is always just on her case about something, whether it be the lights in her room or, you know, this or that. And she's just got this unrequited crush on her. And she just hooks up with other people because she can't have her. And so there is just a lot of mess and charm, and it's just very, very sweet. And it's really, really funny. I don't know if I've ever laughed out loud more ever than reading this book. I've actually read it 3 times now, which is pretty unheard of for me. I'm not much of a rereader, but this book, I feel like I just want to reread it every year, especially if I'm feeling sad, so that I can have a laugh. And for fans of Jane Austen's Emma, this is actually a semi-inspired story by it. So some of the storyline will match up with Emma's Jane Austen, or Jane Austen's Emma, if you are into that sort of thing or looking for a retelling. Back into the trenches of old school hand, we are going to have to talk about Eragon by Christopher Paolini. Jesus Christ. I still just am in shock that this author wrote this book when he was 19. Me at 19, my brain is not braining then, nor is it now. I could never write this. I think this is just one of my favorite worlds to exist in fantasy. I really love the relationship between Eragon and the dragon Saphira. It's also really, really fun on audiobook. If you're into fantasy on audiobook, I know a lot of us love to hear the pronunciation, so that really helps. But you meet Eragon as, you know, he's just a regular old boy. He is not the chosen one. He's just normal. He's a normal guy. And he finds this beautiful blue stone in the forest, and it ends up uprooting his entire life. It turns out this stone is indeed a dragon egg, and there are many, many people looking for it. So we go on this whirlwind adventure of him becoming, I don't want to give anything away even though this has been out for so many years, but essentially he just becomes, he goes from a boy to a man, and the relationship between him and the dragon is fantastic, and it's still fantastic. Many, many years later, the whole series slaps, the inheritance cycle, and there is actually going to be coming out later this year a spin-off book of one of the characters in the world. So if you want to dive in now before that book comes out, now is the perfect time. Let's get back into a little romance. A Rush with Love by Mazey Eddings. Honestly, I requested this book because the premise sounded cute, and then when it arrived, I remember thinking, it's advertised as a slow burn, and it's also a book that has like a dental school setting. I don't really think that's gonna be for me, but I can't resist a romance. They're short, they're fun, they always, you know, improve my mood, so I was like, whatever, we'll just read it. Ma'am, Mazey Eddings, you have charmed me. You have bewitched me, body and soul. The way she writes is so freaking realistic. Her characters feel like people you'd know or you'd meet. Of course, there's a little extra drama because it's a book and it has to keep us entertained, but they're just very realistic. There is often queer characters, there's neurodivergent characters. It's just a diverse cast in every single book that she's written, and she writes quickly. So I am struggling to keep up with how fast she writes because I want to read everything she has ever written. And I have bought everything ever since this book came out in 2022. I think we're on her 4th book now. So I have them all, and I love her so much that I'm actually hosting her to my book club this month. So that's September 2023. And we are reading The Plus One, which is her most recent adult romance, and she also has a YA romance. So she's got 3 adult romances and 1 YA romance. So if you're just looking for romances that are that like silly little, makes you want to kick your feet and giggle as you read, Mazey Eddings is the one. Back down memory lane. You knew it was gonna be here. Speaking of books with great adaptations, they're very different and they're both very ridiculous. I'm not gonna sit here and say that Stephenie Meyer is the most wonderful human nor the most wonderful writer, but I am going to say that these books made me feel a way about reading that really no other series has done. I stood in lines at the Borders bookstores, which don't exist anymore. The Borders bookstores at midnight to get the next one in this series. I went to Walmart and cleared out the Team Jacob t-shirts, and I had posters, and I had everything. I was so hardcore Twilight girly that my brother, when he lived in Washington, he went to Forks for me, and he bought me like this little thing to put on my car so that when I could drive, because I wasn't 16, I had this thing that said like Forks High School. It was ridiculous. But anyways, I was the resident Twilight girl, and I still am the resident Twilight girl in these parts of town. I will never apologize for my love of this series, hence buying these ridiculously funny covers that are inspired by not only the movies, but horror. So these dust jackets are by the artist Katie Video, and I've bought more of her dust jackets since, and they're just really, really fun. But Twilight is near and dear to my heart. Like I said, Team Jacob, Bella is kind of the worst, but also they're so fun. On to one of my 2020 reads that I still think about. Once again, I didn't know how to annotate and look cute about it, so that's when you know I was just vibing, you know? We were just having a great time. We weren't thinking about how to make it look pretty for Bookstagram. This is Sky in the Deep by Adrienne Young. I really hope one day to meet her and to get all my books signed because my collection is vastly growing. But this was one of those books where she is essentially kind of a Viking warrior, if I remember correctly. Definitely some sort of type of warrior. And she is a badass. She has an axe. There's ships involved. There's like a little bit of pirate energy. And I just think this is probably the fastest I've ever read a book in a fantasy genre. I couldn't put it down. I still think about it, and I think I'm overdue for a reread because this is my cup of tea right here. I'm sure as many of you could have guessed, there was gonna be some Taylor Jenkins Reid on here. I am that girl. I am basic. I will be the first to admit it. But also, popular books become popular for a reason. And this, in my opinion, is one of those. I just think it is going to be so cool if and when they adapt it. I can't wait to hear who is casted for it. I really hope they do it justice. In my personal opinion, I actually don't want this one to be a series. Like Daisy Jones, I think it would just be maybe best suited for a movie, even though I want more. I just think it would be better as a movie. But this is one of those books that like I shed real tears while reading, which just doesn't happen for me. I will cry over a commercial, I'll cry over a TikTok, I'll cry over a movie, something about the visual component, but for me, crying while reading a book just isn't something that really happens. But this book, there were a lot of tears shed, and this is actually my second or third copy because I kept borrowing them out to people and not getting them back. So TJR, always great, but this one in particular just has something special. I think we're about halfway through, so take your little intermission if you need, stretch, grab some water. Let me know if you are still here down in the comments which of those you maybe had in your core bank of books that kind of say like who you are. I would love to know. Or if you can think of the number one book that represents you, I would love to know what that is too. Speaking of fantastic adaptations, these are very different but also kind of the same. Enchanted by Gail, Carson, Levine is one of the books I read the most in elementary school. This isn't, once again, not my copy. I had to rebuy it. But they recently just even celebrated, I think it was the 20th or 25th anniversary. You know how much I love the book, the publishers? They sent me this blanket that literally has the entire book written out on it. And I just think that is the coolest thing that I own. But anyways, Enchanted, our dear sweet Ella of Frau. If you haven't heard of this series, Ella is born with a gift or a curse, however you want to look at it. During her christening, in her land, there's a lot of fairies, and one of the fairies decides to bestow upon her a wonderful blessing, and that is the gift of obedience. So when Ella does anything throughout her days, for the rest of her life, anytime someone asks her, demands her to do something without it being a full-on question, she must obey. So that is her gift, and it is very stressful, as you can imagine. Maybe someone could demand her to chop off her head, or maybe they just tell her to do the dishes. She will have to obey no matter what. So it is very, very fun, very stressful, and it is a gift that she wants to keep hidden, but also desperately wants to find out how to rid herself of it. So it's fantastic. The movie, Anne Hathaway, always fantastic. And I'll love it forever. I'll love it forever. And the soundtrack also slaps. Moving on to one book many of you may recognize, but not this particular edition of. This is The Duke and I by Julia Quinn, aka the first book in the Bridgerton series. So Bridgerton, I, like most of us, watched on Netflix and became absolutely in love with. And this had to make my 30 for 30 books because it just made me realize that I get a little comfortable in the genres that I love, and even though I love romance, I wasn't much of a historical romance reader, and I'm still not. I still am very apprehensive about it for some reason. But this just showed me sometimes your favorites can be something you wouldn't expect. So it's really good to get out of your, genre comfort zone or author comfort zone and try something different. I love Bridgerton. I love the show, and it's just such a fun world. I even went to like a little tea party and got dressed up and brought these books with me for a little bookstagram photo shoot once because of how much I love them. So Bridgerton, so much fun. These editions are a limited edition that are from Once Upon a Book Club, by the way. Getting a little dark and twisty now. This author, B.A. Paris, writes some of the best thrillers out there in my opinion. And I feel like I read a lot, but anyhow, I just think that the way she writes is so mysterious, and it gets you flipping from page to page, and it's just not expected. I feel like I said, I'm pretty perceptive. I usually know who the killer is or how it happened. I usually can figure it out. But B.A. Paris always has some element of surprise for me, and that's my favorite thing when reading thrillers. So B.A. Paris is going to be one of those thriller authors that I will always read every single book that she ever writes. So 10 out of 10 for B.A. Paris. Next up, we've got House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This world is so well done. So it's kind of inspired, if I think I'm right, I think it's inspired a bit by like the little House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig has some of the most beautiful, intricate world building and just like character relationships. It's just so dark and twisty, but in a YA setting, so it's very fun. I believe it's inspired by The Little Mermaid, especially her and her sisters. It follows our character Emily here, who lives a sheltered life with her sisters. There were 12 of them, and now it's a very lonely home because 4 of the girls' lives have been cut short, each death more tragic than the last. So you kind of go through this story of finding out how they died, why they died, is someone next, and it's just very creepy and sinister. And I remember having the most trippy dreams while reading this book because my imagination was working in overdrive. I just think the way that she writes beautifully paints a scene without it becoming too much. It's not too much descriptor. I mean, look, it's not even a long book. So I'm very excited now that there's also House of Roots and Ruin out, which is the second book in this world, and I'll be diving into that next, but I just think that this is some of my favorite world building that there is. Next up, speaking of gorgeous world building, is many of us in our favorites, The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. V.E. Schwab is just another auto-buy author for me. This book in particular is also just really pretty. Look at this one. But if you haven't heard of this bookstagram darling, this follows our dear sweet Addie LaRue in France in the 1700s. She essentially is cursed to be forgotten by everyone she ever meets. So if everyone you ever met was going to pretty much immediately forget you, how would you live your life and your days, and what would you do with that? And how would you leave your mark on the world? I just think it's a really interesting premise. I also think this would make a fantastic movie or TV show. I hope that happens one day. But I think it's just very gorgeously written. Once again, gorgeous world building. I love the setting. I love the era. I love Addie. And it's just a beautiful book. Let's get back into romance. The X-Talk by Rachel Lynn Solomon. Speaking of, romance books that just should be exactly what they are, the way that Rachel writes specifically is, once again, I guess this is maybe my thing, it's just relatable characters. They feel like people you could know. They feel like it could be, your cousin or your coworker's love stories. And they're funny. They make you laugh. If there is miscommunication in any of the romance books that I love, like, it's never too much. There's never ever these like weird pregnancy tropes. You know what I mean? Like they've got the right tropes and not the wrong ones. So I love the way that Rachel specifically writes. Rachel, Mazey, and one other author we'll get into are my top 3 romance authors. This book in particular is all about Shay Goldstein, who's a producer at a Seattle public radio station, and there has been a constant clash lately with her and her newest colleague, Dominic, who is fresh off a journalism master's program and convinced that he knows absolutely everything about public radio. The struggling station decides that they need a new concept to air to get more listeners, and Shay proposes a show and her boss is all about it. The show is called The X Talk, and on this show, two exes will deliver relationship advice live on air. And their boss decides that Shay and Dominic are the perfect two people to host this, given how much they already despise each other. So they're not really into this idea that they have to be lying to the listeners because they're not exes and it's just a weird situation. But they also both really want to keep their jobs, so they just decide to go for it, and the show is a smashing success, and their listeners are so invested in their banter and their hatred for each other, and the advice is so interesting and so fun, and they're just really, really stressed because, you know, feelings are starting to develop. They both want to keep their jobs, they need to be exes. So it's very fun to just see how it all goes down. This is also one of those books that has just the right amount of steam, in my personal opinion. It gets steamy and it gets steamy, but for like a brief period of time. And I did laugh aloud a lot while reading this book as well. So The X Talk, Rachel and Solomon. Speaking of my top 3 romance authors, we're gonna get into the third and final one right now, and that is my dear sweet Talia Hibbert. This is also one author I'm dying to meet one day. I think that Talia just writes the sexiest characters. They are once again very relatable and very fun and very real, very diverse cast as well every single time, but they're just, you really get into their head and hearing how they think about love and their life and work and everything, and you really become attached to her characters. And these series in particular, the Brown Sister series, so there's 3 of them. We've got Take a Hint, Danny Brown, we've got Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and Actor Age, Eve Brown. So all 3 of these are just so fun. I actually have reread them all each once, so once again, I'm not a rereader, but these I just freaking love them. Sexy characters, quite a bit of steam, but once again, not too much, and it's just really, really well written, and I just think she's one of the best romance authors there is. Where do I even begin with this one? This is the Other Merlin by Robin Schneider, and once again, a bisexual dream. This book right here is an Arthurian, so the Legend of Arthur retelling, and the characters are just so fun. It starts out with our main character here, who is, oh my gosh, it starts out with our main character, Emery. Emery is disguised as her twin brother, and she shows up at the castle because her brother is, indisposed, and she decides to take his place pretending to be a boy, because girls aren't allowed to practice magic. So she is taking the place as the castle wizard, and it just has so much fun written in. Wow, words are hard. I'm not the writer, I am the reader, but the court is just so juicy. There's scandal, there's lies, backstabbing courtiers, and it's just really, really fun. And it gets even juicier because Emery, our lying, mischievous Emery pretending to be her brother, starts to fall in love with the prince, and she's just worried about her secret being uncovered, what she'll do about her love, how she'll confess, does he feel the same way, or, you know, is she gonna give that all up so that she can be the most powerful wizard of Camelot? So these are really, really fun. They've actually semi-recently got new covers, and the second book is out as well, and I love the way Robin writes. I think it's so fun. It's just like you're gonna be flipping through page after page to find out what happens to the characters, And the way that she writes characters also makes you feel like you know them. You feel like you could hug them. Like, you just become obsessed with them. You want to be their friends, and they become your friends in your mind because you fall in love with their character so much. And I just think that's a really special skill to have, and I love Robin's writing. One thing about me that you should know is your girl is gonna love and eat up dark academia every single time, whether it be the Spotify playlist, a TV show, the outfit, or a book. And for me, one of the books that delivers the most on that vibe is A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. In my Bookstagram days, I've actually already hosted 3 buddy reads of this series for the 3 books in the trilogy. There's also like a complimentary book, so technically 4, but 3. So I've hosted 3 buddy reads every fall of this because I'm like, it's Halloween, we need to read witches, let's do this. I have a whole section dedicated to it on my bookshelf because of how much I love this series. It's just so much fun. I feel like the way she writes is very much of a historian nature, if that makes sense. I just think that she has a really descriptive way of writing, and it makes it feel very real, even though this is a world of witches and other mystical, magical things. It starts out with our main character, Diana Bishop. She is a young scholar herself, and she is a descendant of witches, and she is working in Oxford, and she uncovers a little bit of a secret in the library. So this book essentially comes to her as if it was called to her, and she finds out it has these mystical, magical elements inside the book, and she is not about it. She's like, get this book away from me. I've been trying to deny that I am a witch because I just want to live an ordinary, regular life. And so she tries to banish this book, but after banishing this book, all sorts of witches and warlocks and people start just coming around, paying attention to her and kind of following her around, and she doesn't know why, until in particular one feisty character comes up to us, and that is our Matthew Claremont, and he is a vampire. So he kind of tells her what's going on, and they start to develop a bit of a romance between witch and vampire, and it's just so good. I can't. Like, the romance, just, I eat it up with this one. Like, it's beautiful. It is so good. It's just like one of those like very romantic characters. Matthew is just what I wanted Edward to be, honestly. Like, if you were from many hundreds of years ago, I feel like you should be mature and you should be educated and you should be romantic and you should be this like great man. And Matthew is. Edward, not so much. Edward's still like a teenager. He never grew up mentally somehow. But Matthew did. So if you're looking for a more adult version, I guess, of like Twilight, where it's a bit of this, I don't know, imbalance of power of different creatures mixed with love stories, and I just think that this is the one. I mean, she thinks about everything, like I said, like written like a historian. Like, she even thinks about, one question I asked myself a lot as a middle schooler reading the Twilight series was, what happens when the humans get their periods? Like, what are the vampires doing? Are they just unhinged? Because that's pretty normal, especially like Edward's hanging around Bella all the time. She's gonna get her period once a month. Like, what's happening then? I know that's not good writing, maybe, because it's not as beautiful, but it's real, and I wanted to know. That actually comes up very naturally in this story. So like I said, she thinks of everything. Just kind of a funny side note. But I love this series, and I will never shut up about it. So that's another one to add to your list if you've not yet read it. A Discovery of Witches by Deborah Harkness. All right. Once again, one of the books at the core of who I am is forever and always going to be Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. You knew it was coming, because not only do I collect Anne over here, I also collect Little Women. And once again, I just think this is one of those starter classics, where if you don't think you can read a classic, you can. And it's Little Women, or it's Anne of Green Gables, or it's both. Because yes, written, once again, this one's written in the 1800s. It's relevant today. Jo, our main character, and her dynamic with her sisters, Meg, Beth, and Amy, is just, they have the most beautiful sister relationship. I just think in the year of the Barbie movie and the Eras tour, this book is giving girlhood. It's giving how I love being a woman, and the sisterly relationship is absolutely fantastic. There's also some other really great life lessons in it, including just like helping you feel grateful for the situation that you have, for your family, and just feeling motivated to be your own person and to embrace your own strengths. So beautiful story, also fantastic on audiobook, and also great adaptations exist. And I do think both the 90s and the 2019 versions are absolutely fantastic for different reasons. And this book hits especially hard if you read it like November, December, to kind of ring in the Christmas season. So that would be my recommendation for you, to add it to your TBR then. It's so good. I love it forever. I'm considering getting a Little Women tattoo. So we'll see. I haven't figured out what that looks like yet, but I think it's gonna happen. The next two we're gonna do together because I just couldn't pick which one. We've got All the Stars and Teeth, and we've got Belladonna, both by Adalyn Grace. Adalyn writes YA fantasy, and boy does she do it well. These are just 5-star favorites. I can't get enough of the way that she writes. I think that she paints a beautiful world. It's so rich and aesthetic and interesting, and she actually writes some pretty juicy plot twists, which I think is really interesting for YA fantasy. Like, how do you not see it coming? But like, I don't, with the way that she writes. Specifically, All the Stars and Teeth, we've got princess, pirate, stowaway, mermaid, the crew makes the queen is the premise here. I don't want to give too much away, but like, if you're into pirates, that'll be it. You're gonna love it. And then Belladonna, we've got Signa, Foxglove, also the second book in the series just came out. There's one more coming, Wisteria, so that is on its way. But Signa essentially realizes ever since she was a baby that everyone around her keeps dying, and she thinks that maybe she's cursed or whatever it is, and then she finds out that she herself can't quite die. So there's that, and she ends up having a relationship with Death, who is actually a character in the book itself. So Death is not just this overarching feeling or thing that happens to people. Death is a character that is very intriguing. So Adalyn Grace can do no wrong. I love Adalyn. I love her writing. Auto by author forever and always. But speaking of that YA fantasy kind of vibe, Leigh Bardugo had to be on the list. I mean, the Grishaverse, come on. Also so good on audiobook. I've been going through all of Shadow and Bone and Six of Crows on audiobook, and there were so many tears shed. There was so much giggling. Like, every road trip was faster when I had the Grishaverse along with me. So I highly recommend Shadow and Bone. I think in the Shadow and Bone series, Siege and Storm is probably my favorite. There's just something about a ship and pirates and a certain someone in that book. If you know, you know, even though blondes aren't usually my thing. That's just really fantastic. But I think every book in this world is fantastic, and I'm obsessed. It doesn't get better than this. And last but not least, I kind of hinted at it earlier with Fresh. Emma by Jane Austen is one of my favorites, and not because I'm like a classic slit fit girly as much as I would love to be, but the funny thing is, the reason I fell in love with this book is because I first fell in love with the movie Clueless. Growing up, I wasn't allowed to watch movies or TV, so I would sneak like DVDs from the library or things to watch. And one movie, I think I had it on VHS, was Clueless, and I watched it probably about 50 times. So I can still quote that movie. I have so much love for Cher and Dion in that story. And not until I was an adult, a couple of years ago, did I find out that know Clueless, so I'm sure I can figure out the premise of Emma and follow along pretty well. And boy, was I right. It's still a little hard to read that like older style of English for me, but Emma is just like so juicy. I love the way that Jane writes. I love the relationships between the characters and all of the pining, like, please. So Emma, I just love Emma. I love Clueless. I love Fresh, so I love every retelling apparently there is. But it's just such a good story. And some of the adaptations are really good, especially the one with Anya Taylor-Joy. So I highly recommend. So that's 30 books on my 30th birthday to represent who I am as a person and a reader. Thank you for watching. If you loved this video, please make sure to hit like and hit subscribe. I publish bookish videos every Saturday at 10 a.m. Pacific, and also bookish shorts every day at 12 p.m. Pacific. So there is a lot of bookish content on this channel. Your likes and your subscribes and your comments help me so much as a creator on this platform. So thank you so much for that. And may your chapters be short and your attention be long.